We're continuing to think today about living maturely with Jesus. That's what he invites us to do, to not be babies in the faith, but to grow into maturity. And in Luke 19, we see Jesus towards the end of his ministry as he comes to Jerusalem. It says this, starting at verse 41. As he, Jesus, approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." This is Jesus coming in with all the people laying down their palm branches, making a big show of him, celebrating, children singing and stumbling, old people thinking maybe this is the Messiah of God and getting excited, and Jesus ruins the moment by weeping. Imagine being at a birthday party or a wedding and someone starts weeping. Actually, Sally Allen, our other minister, when one of her sons was married, she did weep as they drove away at the end of the day. What a way to ruin the moment. Everyone else says, "Yes! My boy, oh." Jesus ruins the moment, it seems, by weeping and then prophesying the destruction of Jerusalem. If only you'd known what would bring you peace, and you are not searching for it, you are not longing for it. Just a day after this, Jesus goes into the temple, looks around, turns over the tables and says, "You've made this place a den of robbers." A den of robbers is where the robbers go to hang out after they've done the robbing. It's where they don't have to disguise themselves as non-robbers anymore, but can chill out as fellow robbers and say, "Well, we got a load there, didn't we? Did you read in the news this week about the 18-year-old going around robbing teenagers with violent weapons?" And I thought, what kind of person does that? These guys and girls sit together and they chat about, "We had some good robbing there, didn't we?" And Jesus says, that's how you're treating the temple. This is where you come to acknowledge the presence of God, and you're not behaving in a good way at all. You're not even trying to hide the wrong in you. You're definitely not repenting of it. It's just out there for everyone to see. And this was meant to be a prayer house for all the nations, for everyone to come, of every age and outlook in life. And you've made it this religious place, and even when you've made it this religious place, you can't even stick by your own religious rules. What are you playing at? No wonder you haven't got peace, says Jesus. And it's going to be ripped down. And it was in AD 70. The Romans came in and they stripped it to the floor. And Luke, writing this passage, is writing after AD 70. Almost saying to the Christians, see what Jesus said, it has happened. Jesus laments. He weeps. The Greek word for weep there is uncontrollable crying, where tears are flooding from your eyes and snot, I'm sorry to be graphic, but it is dripping from your nose, and you're so unaware of it, and you don't care what others think of you as you look at it, that you just can't control it. It was me at my dad's funeral when I led it here. Every time I wasn't doing something at the front, I would sit down over there and I would weep for that part, and then I would get up and do the next part again. And I didn't care who saw me. And at the end of the service, when I welcomed everyone to stay for the bun fight afterwards, I think that's the technical term, isn't it, bun fight? I had tears streaming down my eyes and down my cheeks, and I didn't care, because I was weeping and I was lamenting. And that's what Jesus is doing here. Not for one hairy-backed man who died at the age of 68, but for a whole city and a whole religious system. He's saying, if you would have just come back to God, you would have found peace. The King of the earth weeps. Fred Craddock, an American minister, said, "A lament is a voice of love and profound caring, a vision of what could have been and of grief over its loss, of tough hope painfully releasing the object of its hope, of personal responsibility and frustration, of sorrow and anger mixed, of accepted loss, but with energy enough to go on. Let's leave that phrase up there, because that is a long, complicated sentence, but I believe it is worth dwelling in. Have a read of that. Where is that in your life, where you feel empathy, where you look at the city that is not going the way you hoped it would, and you are filled with weeping and wailing? A lament is a voice of love and profound caring. It's not just angry, it really cares. A vision of what could have been and a grief over its loss. You could have gone this way, you could have been this, and look what you're doing. Of tough hope, painfully releasing the object of its hope. I can't control this situation or this person, and I have to leave them in the hands of God. Ever been in that situation in your life where you've got to the end of you and you've thought, there's nothing I can do? I've tried, I've rallied, I've railed, I've bossed, I've pushed, I've caressed, I've encouraged, I've gently, calmly said, come on. And they're not budging. So God, this situation is yours. Of personal responsibility and frustration. What could I have done? If only I... Of sorrow mixed with anger. God, why? Why? Of accepted loss, but with energy enough to go on. God, I'm accepting this situation, but I think it's a comma rather than a full stop in this person's life. And so I'm going to keep going with them. I'm going to keep praying for them. I'm not going to give up on them. The Cambridge Dictionary says empathy is the ability to share someone else's feelings or experiences by imagining what it would be like to be in that person's situation. I saw that Dan Potter, who's leading our worship, has got a scab on his knee. It was irregular of him to wear shorts in worship. And when I saw it, I think it was a scab, I thought, oh, that's gross. That's not very empathetic, is it? Empathy would be, I remember when I had a scab on my knee and how it was really painful to begin with, and then it goes through that itchy phase where you just want to rip it off, but you know if you rip it off, you're just going to get a fresh wound there, so you have to. Are your knees feeling itchy now? That's empathy rather than, oh, gross. Pope Francis, who died recently, said about the church, we must guard against a theology that is exhausted in academic dispute or watching humanity from a glass castle. Good theologians smell of the people and of the road. I like that, do you? And he said, I prefer a church which is bruised, hurting and dirty because it has been out on the streets, rather than a church which is unhealthy from being confined and from clinging to its own security. Like that, do you? I like it in theory. Do I like it in reality? Sometimes, yes. Sometimes I'm a bit busy to have empathy, to get alongside people. Sometimes they're not the right kind of people that I want to get alongside. Sometimes I'm just not in the mood to get alongside them. In our first church, I remember chatting to a man who was about my age back then when I was 25. And we had a lively talk one week, and then his wife phoned me midweek and said, can you please... No, that's wrong. The police knocked on my door. And I immediately thought, I've done something wrong, even though I knew I hadn't. Well, I had, but you know what I mean. Nothing to be arrested. And they said, we need to talk to you. And one of the policemen was a member of my church. So this was a weird dynamic going on, where he was now in a position of power and responsibility. And he said, have you met and found, do you know where this man's wife is? I said, no, I don't. They said, well, he's ended his life, and we need to find her. So when they did find her, they phoned me and they said, she wants you to come round. And so I sat with that lady, 8-year-old daughter, was at school. And I sat with her for 8 hours. We didn't sit on couches, we sat on the floor. And for 8 hours she wept and wailed and rallied and railed at God and cried and laughed and told me stories about her marriage with her husband. And the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, I chatted with this guy at the weekend, he was so happy. He was full of life, stories, holding his coffee after church, talking to me. What's going on? I have a deep love for that woman because of that experience with her. I took her daughter out for a milkshake once a month regularly over the years after that. She was the first and one of the only people who, when we finished our time together, would say to me, the minister, is there anything I can pray for you? 8-year-old girl, lost her dad, now in her mid-20s. I was like, yeah, okay, and I would give her things to pray for. And she would sit there in the car and she would pray for me. What a woman. What a lady of God. I still thank God for her role in my life. And I have a deeper empathy for those who've lost a loved one, because I sat on the floor for 8 hours. I didn't want to. I didn't ask to. It was demanded of me by that woman. Smelt of the people. Smelt of the road. Schubert's Symphony number 8 is unfinished. And I thought of that when I read Karl Rahner's comment. In the torment of this insufficiency of everything attainable, we come to understand that here in this life, all symphonies remain unfinished. Empathy, understanding someone else's situation, acknowledges the limitations of life. That none of us are perfect. That none of us are going to get everything we want this side of eternity. Catholic theologian Ronald Rolheiser says, the ideal we have for our lives habitually crucifies the reality of our lives and makes us too restless to sit peacefully at our own tables, to sleep peacefully in our own beds and be at ease within our own skins. Our lives seem too small for us, and we are always waiting for something or somebody to come along and change things so that our real lives, as we imagine them, might begin. I love that first line. The ideal we have for our lives habitually crucifies the reality of our lives. Your life, my life, is limited. It's full of things that others should have empathy for. But if we're always comparing it to what we think our life should be, we are never going to be content and happy in this life. We've got to come to a point where we accept the limitations that we have as individuals in our families, in our church, in our work and our school situations. Not necessarily to be satisfied with them, but to accept them and say, God, this is who I am. I went on a retreat many years ago at my last church with the associate minister with me, Charlie Ingram. He's an extremely intelligent minister, and he suggested a book for us to read on this retreat. And when we got to the retreat area, we sat down and he said, oh, by the way, Neil, this is a very complicated book. I'm not sure if you'll understand it. And I thought, stuff you. And I went, thank you, Charlie. And I opened the book and it could have been upside down. I started reading it for 15 minutes and I didn't have a Danny LaRue what it was going on about. I thought, this is absolute mumbo-jumbo to me. And I emailed him a couple of weeks ago and I said, Charlie, can I share in the sermon about when you said I wouldn't understand that? But he went, oh, I'm so sorry if I came across as patronising. And I said, that really made me laugh that I tried to read this complicated book. He said, which book was it? I went, I don't know, I didn't read it. You're the one that read it, you should remember it. But in that moment, I had to accept my limitation intellectually. I'm not as clever as him. I don't understand this book. Rather than beating ourselves up with all of the self-improvement books that we've got. How many of you got on your shelves? How many apps that you started reading thinking, this is going to be the book. This is going to be the app that makes me complete. Super Christian. Superhuman. And you got 10 pages in and thought, this is like all the other ones I've read. We need to accept our limitations, that we this side of eternity will not have a full symphony, that our lives will be an unfinished symphony. And I think that gives us permission to live with the tension of our lives, to not beat ourselves up so much. Of course we want to get away from sin. Of course we want to repent of it and turn away from it. But Jesus didn't die on a cross so that we just permanently beat ourselves up that we're not perfect. That's why he died on the cross, because we're not perfect. And so accepting the unfinished symphony of our lives means we can go a bit easier on ourselves, and also we can be a little bit more caring and put less pressure on others. All those others that we project our perfection onto, who then let us down. That head teacher, that home group leader, that friend, that family member, that Baptist minister, that boss at work, God. We got limitations. Maybe we should be a bit kinder. All of our lives are unfinished symphonies. That perfect life that you want to go back to, remember, when it was all good, didn't exist. It didn't. If we could go back there now, there would be things that you think, oh yeah, I struggled with that. Oh yeah, I didn't like that. Oh, I didn't get on with them. Oh, I felt distant from God there. One writer says, to be tormented by complexity and restlessness is to be human. To make our peace with that is to come to peace. And we are mature to the degree that our own restlessness is no longer the centre of our lives. Accept the unfinished symphony. Yesterday we had a testimonial football match at Tonbridge Angels for our ex-assistant manager. He'd been there 11 years and we celebrated it. And he said to me a few months ago, oh Neil, will you help me organise it? He said, because you seem to know some people. I said, yeah, of course I will. 2 weeks ago I messaged him and I said, Parker, his name's Tom Parkinson. I said, Parker, you've not asked me to do anything for your testimonial match. Is there anything you want me to do? And he said, well, you could manage one of the teams if you want. What? He said, you can manage one of the teams. Let's see if you can do it. You give it the big talk. So he gave me 16 players. My central defenders were 39 and 40 years old. All of his team were pretty much in their 20s and early 30s. Surprise. But it was fantastic to meet all these players that I've known over 12 seasons coming back to celebrate his life. And when we were in the change room, they said to me, you're going to do a team talk. So I did a team talk for them. And then when we were just about to go out, one of them went, you're going to pray? Went, yeah. They went, yeah, pray. You do that. I said, okay, let's pray. And so we prayed. I was corrected by one of the players. And they said to me, there's an extra kit. Why don't you put that on? You can come on in the game. And I said, I'll put it on, but I probably won't come on. And so we were losing 2-1. And I thought, I'll go on for the last 20 minutes. So I made the sub. And I came on. The cheers from the millions of people in the stands. Women were throwing flowers at me. People giving me their babies to kiss. It was incredible. I came on. And they scored immediately to make it 3-1. And the guy next to me, he went, come on, we're in this game. I went, I know, Pingu. And then he scored and made it 3-2. And I thought, we're really in this game now. There's 15 minutes left. And then Parky brought on his son, a 4-year-old called Louis. And so Louis came on for the last few minutes of the game. And they gave him the ball. And he started running with it. And our defender's like, oh. And I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking, what are you doing? Clatter that kid. We're in this game. Smash him at the knees, take him out of the game, and we can get this goal. Come on. And they let him score 4-2. I was livid. I went, well done. Yeah, great. Brilliant for you. And so they got the ball back to the centre circle and they said on their team, why don't we let the Vic, why don't we let the Rev, why don't we let Neil score? And so they said, my team went, go on. So I got the ball and they were all like running away from me and I ran up and I got about 6 yards from the goal and I whacked it and it hit the post and went out. They were laughing. People in the crowd were singing something derogatory. And then they gave it to Louis again and he scored again. And then they gave it to me again, and I scored. And they gave it to Louis again, he got a hat-trick. And they gave it to me again, and I lobbed it from 30 yards, and it hit the bar and the post, and went in, the linesman said. And we celebrated. When Louis got the ball, I didn't want him to score. When he scored, and they gave me the ball, and I hit the post, I had a deep empathy with him of the pressures of being a professional sportsman. And when he scored his second one, I really clapped, because I wanted him to score, because I knew it meant a lot to his family. When you get home, I encourage you to listen to Schubert's Symphony No. 8, Unfinished. It may be unfinished, but it is beautiful, really beautiful. And you and me, we may be unfinished. We have our limitations. But we're beautiful. In God's eyes, we really are. You are, and I am. And that means we can afford one another a little bit more empathy as we show our maturity in Jesus.